September 19th, 1944, at 0730 hours, Bison-le-Petit, Lorraine, France. A heavy morning fog smothered the French fields as Panther tank commander Unteroffizier Karl Hoffmann pressed his eye to the cup-up, staring into a gray wall that erased anything past 30 mm. His fingers shook, not from the chill of September, but from what he'd just seen slip through that mist. In a fleeting gap, Hoffmann had caught a glimpse of something that broke every rule he knew about armored combat. An American tank destroyer, if that's even what it was, seemed to appear out of thin air, fire twice, and fade away before his gunner could swing the turret halfway onto target. The blazing wreck of a Panther 50 men off their left flank proved it wasn't his imagination. That morning, 42 Panthers from the 113th Panzer Brigade had driven into battle certain of their edge in steel and engineering. With its high-velocity 75 mm and sloped armor that shrugged off most Allied shots, the Panther was held up as the peak of German design. These crews had been told again and again that American tanks were second-rate, thrown together fast, temperamental, and crewed by novices who leaned on numbers, not skill. But what waited in the fog-soaked fields near Arracourt would rip apart all the assumptions they had carried from the Eastern Front. They would later learn the name, M18 Hellcat, only after capture or if they lived to tell it. The machine about to confront them showed that the Americans had redrawn the rules. They sacrificed armor for a kind of speed that made standard tank tactics feel useless. And that shift didn't start as a reaction to German armor. It came from a distinct American idea that took shape in December 1941. Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Davis Bruce, head of the new Tank Destroyer Center at Fort Mee, Maryland, studied blitzkrieg like an engineer, not a traditionalist. His takeaway was radical. Instead of tank-on-tank slugfests, build a vehicle that hits and disappears before the enemy can answer. Bruce's blueprint ranked three things above all: speed, firepower, and crew efficiency. Armor, sacred in German thinking, came a distant fourth. In the Wehrmacht, that would have sounded reckless. Their path from Panera III to Panther to Tiger was a straight line toward thicker plates and larger guns. The Ordnance Department put out a requirement for a fast destroyer with torsion bar suspension, a Wright Continental R975 engine, and at first a 37 mm gun. Prototypes changed quickly, armament shifted, and the T7 76 mm gun motor carriage emerged, the basis of what became the M18. By July 1943, when Buick's Flint, Michigan plant sent the first production Hellcats into the world, they had built a vehicle ready to challenge everything. Armies thought they knew about armored war. It ran on a 9-cylinder Wright R975 radial making 350 to 400 horsepower, the same engine as the M4 Sherman, but on a hull of roughly 20 tons instead of 33. The M18 reached speeds that seemed impossible for tracks. Hellcats could do 55 mb or 89 km. Some accounts say 60 more in perfect conditions. That wasn't just a little faster than German tanks. It lived in another league. The Panther's 46 kmph, 29 mph on roads, looked fine until you compared it to an M18's ability to hold 40 mph across broken ground. German dominance in armor had grown from combined arms, tanks, mechanized infantry, artillery, engineers working as one, honed in Poland and France. Tanks were the armored fist, built to rip open lines and tear up rear areas. Speed mattered, but survival mattered more. As designs evolved, they grew heavier, thicker, and stronger. The Panther of 1943 weighed 45 tons and carried up to 100 mm on its turret face. The Tiger II, arriving in 1944, swelled to 70 tons and as much as 100 meters there. American Tank Destroyer Doctrine, written into Field Manual 1805 and refined through 1943, broke clean from that tradition. Tank destroyers were to be held back, then rushed to enemy armor concentrations. Rather than duel head-on, they'd use mobility to flank, strike from sides and rear, and shift before the answer landed. The M18 started life in Harley Earl's Buick studios. Earl, famous for car styling, brought a fresh eye to military hardware. The result looked and acted like a racing machine with a cannon, not a typical tank. Its combat baptism came in Italy, where 5 T-70s went to the 8th Tank Destroyer Battalion at Anzio in spring 1944. Italy's steep ridges and tight roads hardly favored a high-speed vehicle. Yet even there, the M18 startled German defenders. Those early fights remained piecemeal, and the lessons didn't ripple through the Wehrmacht. In France, as the invasion loomed, German planners worried about masses of Shermans and about M10 tank destroyers, which, though quicker than German tanks, still played by more conventional rules. By September 1944, when the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion and its M18 Hellcats joined the U.S. 4th Armored Division near Arracourt, the German force in Lorraine was misreading the battlefield. The 113th Panzer Brigade had formed on September 4, 1944. By September 16th at Saarburg, it fielded 42 Panthers. Many of its crews were Eastern Front veterans used to facing T-34s and KV-1s in brutal slugging matches where armor and gun decided who lived. The 704th had originally trained on the M3 gun motor carriage. Despite needing several fixes during trials, the battalion produced outstanding test results and later drew production Hellcats. They had spent months refining techniques to squeeze every advantage from the Hellcat speed. On the morning of September 19th, as the 113th Panzer Brigade crept through the fog toward Arracourt, they expected to brush aside thin American screens and drive for the 4th Armored's rear. German intel had spotted Shermans, but not strong anti-tank defenses. At Los 7 Fitim, with Panthers edging forward at 5 Bev Palper and eyes straining through the murk, Lieutenant Edwin Leiper's 4-vehicle M18 platoon from Company C, 74th Tank Destroyer Battalion, waited near Richior Light. The M18S had been set before dawn, engines purring low, crews watching their sectors. Lieutenant Edwin Leiper led an M18 platoon of Company C to Richy-la-Petite. On the way to Monner, he spotted a German gun tube pushing out of the fog 30 FT away and fanned his platoon out. The Germans' first real hint came when an American tank destroyer exploded into motion, jumping from idle to 30 Mittelpatrouille in seconds, a burst a Panther needed nearly half a minute to match. The M18 shot from cover, dashed to a flank, and drilled the side of the nearest Panther before the German turret came even halfway round. In 5 minutes, 5 tanks from the 113th Panzer Brigade went down for the loss of 1 M18. What they faced was systematic destruction by an opponent who refused to play by familiar rules. The performance gap between Panther and M18 created a mismatch at every turn. The Panther's nearly 7-ton turret, protected by thick armor and carrying that long 75, needed 60 seconds for a full spin on hydraulics. In real fighting, with the engine throttled low to avoid attention, traverse was even slower. The M18's turret weighed just over 2 tons, and its traverse compared lightning fast to the M10's hand-cranked turret. A Hellcat crew could swing, track, and fire in seconds, while Panther crews were still hunting for the threat. Early crew reports said the M18 could run for hundreds of miles in tough conditions without major work on its gun or engine. Routine maintenance was light. The Panther, for all its fearsome image, was plagued by mechanical ills. Final drive failures were common. A drive meant for a 35-ton machine was mated to a 45-ton hull. On September 19th, a number of Panthers were abandoned, not from enemy fire, but from breakdowns while trying to chase M18s. As the fog thinned near 900, American doctrine showed its full shape. The Hellcats didn't fight as lone hunters. They moved as a network, using radio calls to hand off targets and warn of danger. Under Captain Tom Evans, Company C's lead platoon acted as bait, drawing German eyes while two more platoon of Hellcats slid along the flanks. It was textbook tank destroyer practice. One element pins, the others maneuver for killing shots. And they weren't working alone. CCA's line around Arracourt was a thin salient, outposts of armored infantry and engineers backed by tanks, destroyers, and artillery. The M18s were the quick strike arm inside that larger combined system. By noon on September 19th, the 113th Panzer Brigade's thrust had ground to a halt. The platoon kept firing, wrecking 10 more German tanks while losing 2 additional M18. One M18, under Sergeant Henry R. Hartman, accounted for 6, mostly Panthers. The math stunned German commanders. Panthers at 107 out of 100 Reichsmarks and 2,000 man-hours to build were going up against vehicles that cost 50 cents of $500 and rolled off lines far faster. Poor German deployments soon bared their vulnerable flank armor to Shermans, which used the fog to swing around and knock out 11 Panzers. Without solid reconnaissance, they had walked into a trap. And the M18's edge wasn't just raw engine power. The whole vehicle was designed for speed and quick action. The Hellcat added clever maintenance shortcuts. The engine sat on steel rollers so crews could unhook it from the transmission, roll it onto the dropped rear deck, work on it, and reconnect. A trained team could swap an engine in under 2 hours, a job that took a full day on a Panther. Buick fit torsion bars for a smoother ride. German tanks stuck with leaf springs or interled road wheels that made fast travel over rough ground risky. An M18 could hold 40 med-push-cars where a Panther had to slow to 10 or risk throwing a track. The automatic transmission gave another edge, drawing from Buick's civilian know-how. The torque automatic let drivers focus on the wheel while the gearbox handled shifts. Panther drivers fought stiff manuals with double clutch timing. American radio superiority was decisive. Every M18 had an SCR 508 FM set, clear, reliable voice comms between vehicles and with support. German platoons often had a single radio, leaving others to flags or pre-planned moves. That communications gap amplified the M18's speed. U.S. crews could coordinate on the fly, call targets, warn of incoming threats, and pivot tactics instantly. German commanders were isolated, each leader peering through narrow ports and making choices on what only he could see. By September 20th, when the 111th Panzer Brigade entered the fight, German tankers felt something new. They feared an enemy they couldn't fight on their terms. The effect reached beyond the moment. These were men who had faced T-34s in Ukraine, who had lived through Kursk, who believed German skill and superior machines could balance numbers. The Panther had seemed to confirm it, a tank that could kill any Allied vehicle and shrug off return fire. Now that certainty was gone. The speed gap created situations German training never covered. Panthers, built for offense and dominance, were suddenly trying to defend themselves from a foe that wouldn't stand still. Hellcat crews learned a shot placed between the mantelet and glasses plate could glance into a Panther's driver's compartment, killing the crew or disabling the tank. That demanded close range and precision, suicidal if the enemy could reply quickly. But Panthers couldn't answer in time. Sluggish traverse, lazy acceleration, and tight visibility turned strengths into liabilities. The Germans tried workarounds. Some paired Panthers back-to-back to cover full arcs, but that meant sitting still and giving the Americans the initiative. It also depended on reliable inter-vehicle comms, something most German tanks didn't have. Behind the tactical shift stood an industrial truth German officers were only starting to see. The M18 wasn't just quicker, it was easier to build, fix, and replace. Production began in July 1943. By October 1944, 257 units had been made. It peaked in January 1944 at 250 M18s a month. Each needed roughly 500 man-hour, far less than the Panther's 2,000. German production only got more complicated as the war dragged on. Panthers needed special tooling, highly skilled labor, and scarce materials. Their Maybach engines were hand-built by craftsmen. In practice, each tank was nearly handmade, bottlenecking output even when parts existed. American plants could replace every M18 lost at Arracourt in under 2 days of work. At its absolute peak, Panther production reached 380 per month across all factories, and those had to cover every front, training, and replacements. Losing 39 Panthers at Arracourt burned more than a week's output. As fighting around Arracourt stretched through late September, U.S. crews kept refining tactics. M18s began to swarm in coordinated groups, using speed to hit from several angles at once. On the morning of September 22nd, they tried something new. Hellcats sprinted over open ground flat out at German positions near Coincourt. The Panthers, stunned by the closing speed, fired a handful of rushed shots before the M18s were on top of them. The effect on German morale was crushing. They heard the engines from a kilometer away, knew the Americans were coming, and still couldn't react in time. The M18S covered the gap in under a minute, too fast for German gunners to track cleanly. As the battle flowed on, another Hellcat advantage stood out. The vehicles kept running. Crews reported their machines could cover hundreds of miles under stress without major fixes. Panthers were shop queens. By September 22nd, the 113th Panzer Brigade noted that many of their original tanks were gone to mechanical failures, not enemy fire. Final drives died under hard maneuvering. Transmissions overheated as drivers tried to surge forward to meet M18 rushes. Built with American mass production standards, the M18 just kept going. The air-cooled right engine was loud, but nearly unkillable. The automatic gearbox needed little attention. The torsion bars had few failure points. On September 24th, Lieutenant Colonel Crichton Abrams of the 37th Tank Battalion planned a combined push with the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion. Shermans would move slowly, soaking up enemy focus, while M18s used timber and dead ground to slip forward at speed. It worked cleanly. As Panthers engaged Shermans at long range, trusting their better guns and armor, Hellcats erupted from cover at several points. Caught in crossing fire, the German tanks couldn't tackle threats from many directions at once. By September 25th, higher-level German leaders started to grasp what they were facing. General de Panzertrooper Hasso von Manteuffel of the 5th Panzer Army issued new orders that were, in effect, a concession. Enemy tank destroyers of exceptional speed operating in this sector. Do not pursue, do not engage in mobile battle. Those lines turned Panthers, designed as mobile attackers, into static boxes. They surrendered initiative and admitted German armor couldn't dominate through tactics and tech anymore. By the end of Arracourt, the 704th had killed 39 German tanks for the loss of 4 M18s destroyed and 3 damaged. That ratio validated U.S. tank destroyer doctrine in dramatic fashion. The fight showed that German thinking, armor, firepower, deliberate movement could be beaten by speed and flexibility. The M18 proved a lightly protected vehicle, barely safe against small arms, could command the field against heavy tanks through mobility alone. The next big test came in December 1944 in the Battle of the Bulge. The German last push in the west broke through at first, but as M18 battalions rushed to key points, their speed again bent the timeline. Team D Sorry, a tank infantry task force of the 10th Armored Division, was told to hold Noville. With only 4 M18s from the 75th Tank Destroyer Battalion backing them, they took on pieces of the 2nd Panzer Division. Team DESOB's flat-out highway run to block the enemy is one of the rare times Hellcats actually used their true top speed to beat an opposing column to the punch. Racing M18s into blocking positions ahead of German spearheads repeatedly wrecked timetables. Panthers and Tigers found themselves facing M18s that had sprinted forward to ideal ground, concentrating faster than German commanders could rewrite plans. Theater-wide numbers told a sobering story for believers in German armor. The M18 logged a better kill-to-loss ratio than any other American tank or destroyer in World War II. Claimed kills totaled 5 Twin 06, 4 988 in Europe, 17 in Italy, 11 in the Pacific. In Europe, the ratio was 2.3.1. Overall, 2.4.1. Those figures look even stronger when you remember M18s weren't primarily assigned to tank killing. They were often thrown into improvised jobs, usually direct fire for infantry. Even outside their lane, they stayed effective. The core split between German and American design philosophies shows clearly in Panther versus M18. Both grew from combat lessons, but the conclusions couldn't have been more different. The Germans studied the T-34's slope and gun and decided to build something similar, but better. That produced Panther. More armor, more gun. It was evolutionary thinking. The Americans took a revolutionary turn. The best armor is not getting hit. The M18 wasn't a rolling bunker. It was a precision tool on tracks. Hit, move, and live. Its success at Arracourt carried deeper lessons in innovation. Germany climbed a straight ladder. More armor, bigger guns, heavier hulls. Each generation improved on the same paradigm. The Americans, limited by shipping across the Atlantic and facing an enemy already near the top of traditional design, chose to change the paradigm. The M18 didn't try to out-Panther the Panther. It made the Panther's strengths less relevant. Across Arracourt and beyond, individual Hellcat crews showed what the machine could do in bold hands. Sergeant Henry R. Hartman, the man who knocked out 6 Panthers on September 19th, became a legend among destroyer crews. His method, used terrain to mask the run-in, hit from odd angles, and move instantly after firing, became the pattern for M18 employment. On October 13th, when elements of the 11th Panzer Division, reinforced with Tiger 1s, tried to retake Arracourt, the day proved that even a Tiger's Edge couldn't beat the M18 speed and tactics. Tigers crawled at a 15 mph max, while Hellcats streaked around their sides. The Tiger turret, even slower than the Panthers, simply couldn't follow the quick destroyers. The M18's creation story was just as disruptive. From concept to combat took under 2 years, astonishing for a brand-new armored vehicle. The design began in Harley Earl's Buick studio. Earl's car background brought automotive thinking to a battlefield tool. Production leaned on car industry methods. Workers who built Buicks could, with minimal retraining, assemble Hellcats. Where German tanks needed special tools and artisans, the M18 used standard automotive parts wherever possible. The Hellcat folded in technical edges that multiplied its punch. Its fire control setup, simpler than German optical rangefinders, was quicker in the fluid knife fights M18s preferred. The periscopic sight could work independently of the gun, so the commander could scout while the gunner engaged. German crews often needed to swing the whole turret to look, slowing target finding and telegraphing intent. The M18 also stored shells in protected bins, lowering the odds of a catastrophic cook-off if hit. Crews sometimes lived through strikes that would have blown up German tanks, keeping experienced teams in the line. As 1944 turned to 1945, U.S. tank destroyer doctrine kept evolving. The early idea, held reserves racing to massed enemy armor, rarely happened as written. In practice, M18s often supported infantry divisions, offering mobile anti-tank cover and direct fire. That flexibility itself was an American strength. While Panzer units clung to aging tactics, U.S. formations adapted. M18 battalions learned how to fight in towns, woods, and across rivers, scenarios their designers never imagined. By early 1945, German armor sat in a trap partly sprung by the M18's success. Without equal mobility, their tanks were parked more often, stuck in static defense. That ceded initiative to the Allies and left German armor open to artillery and air. Production told the same story. Bombed factories, precious materials, and labor shortages hobbled German output. American lines kept turning out M18s and other vehicles at rates that seemed unreal to their opponents. General Oberhegderian, Inspector General of Panzer Forces, saw where this led. The M18 wasn't just a destroyer, it was the physical proof of American tactical and industrial advantage. Germany couldn't win a mobile war against a foe that moved twice as fast, nor a production war against a foe that built machines in a fraction of the time. The Rhine crossing in March 1945 sealed it. As German commanders tried to mass armor to stop the crossing, M18s dashed to the key spots, often arriving hours before German units, despite starting farther away. At Remagen, when the Ludendorff Bridge fell into Allied hands intact, M18s were among the first to cross, using speed to throw up a bridgehead perimeter before a German response could form. Panthers and Tigers rushing to crush the bridgehead found Hellcats already set in ambush. The M18's tail didn't close in 1945. In Korea, 650 early M18s were turned into M39s, turrets removed, seats added for up to 8 troops in the open fighting space. Those armored utility vehicles showed how solid the chassis was. Perhaps even more telling were reports from former Wehrmacht officers advising the new West German Bundeswehr in the 1950s. When they weighed American options, they advised against heavy tanks and leaned toward mobile systems inspired by the M18. The M18's psychological weight lingered. German veterans often rated it the most feared American armored vehicle, more than the M26 Pershing or even the P-47 Thunderbolt hunting tanks from the sky. The Hellcat had done more than win tank fights. It broke a mindset German crews had carried since 1940. The hunters had become the hunted, and that reversal never truly healed. The numbers frame the impact. Production timeline. Design kickoff, December 1941. First prototype, April 1943. Production start, July 1943. Peak output, January 1944. 250 per month. Production end, October 1944. Total built, 257. Combat record, enemy vehicles claimed destroyed, 5 of 26. M18S lost in combat, 216. Kill to loss, 2.4 to 1. Mechanical readiness, 78%. Speed comparison, M18 Hellcat, 55 to 60 MIP road, 26 spec mile per cross country. Panther, 29 MIP road, 15 MIP cross country. Tiger, 24 MIP road, 12 MIP cross country. Tiger 2, 21 MIP road, 10 MIP cross country. The contrast between Panther and M18 came from two different ways of thinking about armored war. The Germans perfected the classic tank, heavily armored, hard-hitting, and intricate. They pushed that idea to its edge with Tiger II, almost the final form of World War I concepts. The Americans with M18 didn't try to outbuild a traditional tank. They made something that made traditional tanks less central. By putting speed over armor, mobility over firepower, and reliability over complexity, they created a weapon that challenged decades of doctrine. The M18's design legacy stretches well beyond World War II. Modern doctrine, mobility, situational awareness, and worked operations over sheer gun and plate traces back to lessons from the Hellcat. Israeli Merkava, American M1 Abrams, German Leopard 2, all carry forward pieces of the M18 story. The primacy of reliability, the power of awareness, and the essential role of tactical mobility. Though today's tanks are heavily armored, they chase speed and agility in ways World War II German designers would have found unbelievable. In the post-war years, veterans on both sides remembered the M18's stamp on the war. U.S. destroyer crews spoke with pride about the machine and the shift it represented. German tankers, decades later, recalled the dread and helplessness of fighting an enemy that wouldn't play by their rules. In 1985, at Arracourt, veterans from both flags walked the ground where the M18 had changed the game. German and American former soldiers, now gray-haired, shared stories and recognized the transformation that began there. A restored Hellcat roared across the field, and even 40 years on it, could still reach that astonishing top speed. As it tore past the places where so many Panthers had died, German veterans watched quietly, a living reminder of what they had seen. The story of German tankers meeting the M18 Hellcat is bigger than tactics or tech. It marks a pivot in military thought, a moment when a whole philosophy lost ground to a different approach. The Germans had driven the classic tank to its limit with Tiger II. The Americans with M18 didn't make a better classic tank. They made something else, something that altered armored combat. The German crews at Arracourt and beyond weren't just beaten. They were faced with proof that their framework for armored war needed a rewrite. Panthers and Tigers, brilliant machines, became exposed against an opponent who refused the old script. With 526 kills for 216 losses, the numbers tell one chapter, but the deeper win was in minds and doctrine. The Hellcat showed that victory doesn't always go to the biggest gun or the thickest plate, But to those who adapt and implement new ideas fastest, in the end, those who survived encounters with the M18 carried away a hard lesson. In war, like in evolution, the strongest isn't always the one that endures, the most adaptable is. The M18 Hellcat, streaking across French fields at unreal speeds, firing and fading like a ghost, embodied that idea. The revolution had run its course. The age of pure heavy tank rule was under challenge, and mobility, flexibility, and speed had taken the stage. The German crews who watched it unfold knew, even if they couldn't put it into words then, that they had seen not just a tactical setback, but the birth of new armored war concepts. Their recollections, kept in archives and studies, testify that sometimes speed and agility do beat armor and firepower, especially when that speed hits 55 to 60 mep and carries a 76mm gun. The Hellcat didn't only destroy German tanks, it destroyed German certainty about how tanks should fight, shattered assumptions about armored battle, and proved revolutionary thinking can defeat evolutionary perfection. For the crews who met them in the fog at Arracourt and beyond, Hellcats were not just a new American weapon. They were a sign of a new era in mechanized war, one where the race, quite literally, went to the swift.